Hello everyone, Dr. Chris Martenson here with a very important presentation for you. I'm really looking forward to giving you this information and then finding out what you think about it. Let's go straight to the presentation now. Let's not take any more time before we go there. I'm going to talk today about our unsustainable energy future and what comes next. And this is especially relevant for you in Europe at this point in time. Now, before we go there, let me talk about my background. I am a scientist. My PhD is in a biological science, and these are neurons that have been grown in a culture. And this is what I used to do. And when we cultured neurons like this, we would see them become very beautiful and complicated and complex, and they're talking to each other, and they have axons and dendrites. But if you ever forgot to feed them, they would do this and ball up and become very simple again as they struggle with less energy. In this case, their energy would be glucose, but this is a metaphor in exactly what happens to economies. When an economy gets starved for energy, it too becomes very simplified. Now, I want to connect some things because everything is connected to everything. Leonardo da Vinci said, "Learn how to see, realize that everything connects to everything else." And that is true. There's a dark winter shaping up here for Europe and for the rest of the world for 2021. We can read all the headlines, but there's a big energy crunch right now. And the question is, what is it? Where did it come from? Will it go away? And the answer is no, and I'm going to tell you why today. So these unbearable prices that people are talking about, they're just beginning. This is going to become a lot more unbearable as time goes on. And here's why. So first, we do live in very interesting times. These three dots, economy, energy, environment, they must all be looked at in one place. And this is what I do in something called the Crash Course, which you can find at peakprosperity.com. The Crash Course connects these three big E's together: economy, energy, environment, which I can synthesize very quickly into the economy is something that must grow, or at least our financial system must grow, or it's collapsing. The energy systems can't grow anymore. That's a big, big predicament. And the environment is depleting and also being exhausted with waste inputs. So all of these things must be seen as connected. I'm going to just focus today on energy, a little bit on the economy, tiny bit on the environment. So what does this mean? Well, there's actually a fourth E in this story, and that's exponential growth. It's really important that we share this understanding. So let me talk to you about this very quickly. So exponential growth is something that if we're tracking it, it makes a chart that looks like this. They also call it a hockey stick chart because of that sharp corner. All you need to get a chart looking like this, all you need is for something to be growing by some percentage over time. Now, here's the thing. We're humans. You and I, we're humans. We don't intuitively understand exponential growth. Sure, we can look at the chart, but it doesn't really mean anything to us because we're more linear in how we understand the world. So how would we go about understanding this chart more intuitively? I have a thought experiment for you, and it goes like this. Imagine that I have a magic eyedropper, and it's magic because when I take a drop of water out of this eyedropper, it will double every minute. So if I put a drop of water in your left hand, after 1 minute, you'd have 2 drops. And after 2 minutes, you'd have 4 drops. And after about 5 minutes, you could fill up a thimble. So here's the thought experiment. We're going to go to a big stadium. This is Yankee Stadium in New York. We're going to do 2 things. First, we're going to put a wall all the way around the back so it's now watertight. And 2, we're going to handcuff you to the highest row of bleacher seats. So you're up there, you're handcuffed. 12 o'clock in the afternoon tomorrow, say, I go down onto the pitcher's mound. I put one of these magic drops out there. And here's the question. How long do you have to escape from your handcuffs? So we begin at 12:50. How long? The answer is that you have until 12:50 that same day. Just 50 minutes later, and this park is completely full. But that's not actually the most important question. How long do you have before the park is still just 3% filled, And then how long do you have after that? So at what point is this park still 97% not filled? It's empty. And how long do you have to escape from that point? And the answer is this park is still 97% empty space at 12:45. And just in the last 5 minutes, it goes from 3% to 6 to 12 to 25 to 50, 100% full. So in those last 5 minutes, this stadium just completely fills up. So that's the power of compounding. And I bring it up because that chart I showed you before is actually a real chart. It shows billions of people across thousands of years. Humans are growing at just about 1% per year in population. But remember, any percentage over time gives you this chart. I was born in 1962. There were 3 billion people on the planet. Today, there's 7.8 billion people. Said another way, it took 2 million years for humans to reach the first billion, in just 200 years for the next 6.8 billion. That is that these exponential functions, they really speed up, especially towards the end. We see all different kinds of non-linear or exponential charts. Here we can see water use or forest loss, fisheries exploited, and really importantly, energy consumption. And this is the point I really want to make today. But we can see these charts everywhere. This is a chart of credit market debt in the United States, trillions of dollars up the y-axis, starting in 1970 along the x-axis. And what we see here is the red is the actual data of total debt in the United States, which is corporate debt, household debt, federal debt, all kinds of debt. Not liabilities, just debt. And that blue line is an exponential curve fit, and it's almost a perfect fit. We have an exponential debt-based money system in the United States, but you have the similar thing in Germany, Europe, Japan. Wherever people are watching this, everybody has the same money system, which kind of needs to constantly grow exponentially or it gets very unhappy. So that little wiggle in that chart, that little wiggle all the way to the right out there, that 2008 wiggle, that almost destroyed the entire world's financial system, or at least that of the Western countries. And that shows the fragility of a system that needs to constantly grow, or it's collapsing. I'm going to tell you why it can't continue to grow much longer. By the way, same predicament in Japan. You look at that black line in particular, that's Japanese government debt per capita, per person. It is just exploding for two reasons. Debt is also climbing and population is now shrinking. So that's two pinches, two ways that is driving that exponential growth, just exploding. It's all over the world though. This is a global phenomenon. We're seeing worldwide debt, just debt, not or underfunded liabilities, but debt, just exploding everywhere. Now, if you take one thing from the exponential example I gave you, it's simply this, that exponential systems speed up at the end. So if you experience the world going faster and faster, sure, positive exponential growth in terms of how technology is becoming better and better, that's amazing. On the other side, we're seeing losses in the natural world that are exponentially increasing. But most importantly to us, to everybody listening, and how our economic futures come is to do with energy. And here's why. Economy and energy are really tightly linked. Here we see the most robust economic chart I have in my entire portfolio, and that is the relationship between energy and gross domestic product, or GDP, or in other words, the economy. So on the y-axis, we have primary energy in something called exajoules. That's a very, very large set of numbers, and real GDP across the bottom. And we see that this is a straight line. This is just a straight line, that if you are going to get more GDP, more economy, by definition, you will be using more energy. It's very linear. Why did I put it in global energy use and global GDP? Because we're telling ourselves stories that aren't true about how a local economy seems to have decoupled from energy use. And it's not true. Local economies have just outsourced their energy consumption to another country. China typically, maybe India, somewhere. And so when we look at it across the globe, this is what we see. We see that if you're going to have a larger economy, you are going to be using more energy. This is a really important chart. In fact, if you just said I had one chart that I had to explain how the future is going to unfold, it would be this one. And the reason for that is that we have to talk about energy now because it's really critical we understand just two concepts about it. Here's the first one. Energy, well, we don't care how much energy. Are we getting 100 million barrels of oil out of the ground? Is it 50 million barrels? Is it 200 million barrels? That's not important. What's important is on this chart. And so this is a chart explaining a very important concept about net energy. So what we're charting here is the energy we get back, the energy out from our investments in getting the energy in the first place. So energy out is in green. The energy we have to put back in is in red. And so up the left axis on the Y side there is what percent return are we getting? And on the bottom, we see 50, 45, 40. Those numbers are the amount of energy we're getting back out. So let's imagine all the way on the left, we're getting 50 barrels of oil out after putting 1 barrel of oil in. 1 divided by 50, that gives us a 98% return. That's why we see that green is all the way up to the 98%. And that little red smear at the top on the left is the 2% of the energy, or the 1 barrel that we had to put in to get the 50 barrels back out. By the way, back in 1930, we were getting 100 to 1 returns, we humans, 100 to 1 returns from our oil investments. And as we went further along in time, we still would get like 25 to 1 returns, and we think we're getting then maybe 18 to 1 or 10 to 1 returns. But what we need to notice here is that this chart isn't linear. Notice what happens is we start to put in more and more and more energy to get less and less and less energy out. And all the way on the right, this chart crosses at 0% returns when at the number 1. When we are putting 1 barrel of oil in to get 1 barrel of oil back out, we are getting nothing back that we can actually use to run society. Now, why do we care? Because everything about your life, the cars you drive, the house you live in, how warm it is, the job you have, even being able to watch this across the internet, depends on us out here in society having surplus energy to use. The red energy in this story is the energy we have to use to get energy, and that is falling. And when it falls, it doesn't fall linearly where we can get our arms around it and understand it. It falls exponentially. That's what this curve says. That we should be focused fully as a species, as humans, as Americans, as Germans, as people from India or China. What we really care about is how much net energy are we getting out from our energy efforts. This is where the story gets very interesting. By the way, this is global primary energy consumption by source. You've probably heard a lot about renewables and solar and wind. This chart shows how much of our energy still comes from traditional biomass all the way on the bottom, then coal, then oil, then gas. And then when we put nuclear and hydro on top of that, well, solar and wind and all the other renewables are just these little tiny, tiny, tiny smears at the top. They've been growing very rapidly, but not as rapidly as our growth in use of fossil fuels. This is still the data we have. It is a fantasy to think that we're going to be able to just replace all of that fossil fuel use by other means without an extraordinary dedication, focus, prioritization of our budgets, which has not yet happened in a very serious way. So the mining industry alone consumes about 10% of world energy consumption. Food production consumes another whole block of percentages. But most importantly, energy consumption and production are now, we're seeing a lot of energy production consuming a huge amount of energy itself. This is a really important paper. It just came out. Everybody should read it. I'm going to go through just 2 of its conclusions that are really important. Peak oil and the low carbon energy transition, a net energy perspective. Delanoy et al. By the way, you can see on the right, only 32 people have read it so far. So this is as of this morning, which is October 20th. So very, very important paper. Here's what they find. This is a critically important chart. Here they're showing from oil, and peak oil is all the colors except for that that yellowish thing. This light color way out here. Let me see if I can draw this for you. This whole piece right here, that is actually the energy required to produce energy. And you can see that the energy right now, back here in 2020, this is about 15% of the energy that we use is simply used to make more energy. But that's going to become 50% by the time we get out here. So we'll be using half of our energy just to get energy. That wasn't true all this other period of time back here where we had huge amounts of energy coming back from energy. That's the return on investment. This is an extraordinarily important development because as we use more and more and more energy to simply get energy, do you remember those nerve cells I showed you at the beginning, how they became simpler and simpler as they got starved for energy? This chart is telling you that our overall economy is going to be starved for energy. It will become simpler over time. This is an incredibly important development. You are getting a taste of this right now in the winter of 2021 in Europe. Things that were easy to do on the way up with lots of energy become harder to do on the way down when you have less energy to work with. In fact, energy is the master resource. All other resources are possible if and only if you have energy to get them. So this chart is really important. They charted it a different way here in this paper, and they talk about how here we're showing the amount of energy hits that 50% mark right there, where the dotted line is the energy required to produce energy. And this will be true by the year 2050 if their models are right. And it's a pretty extensive paper. So this is really critical to understand because everything about what we think we know about wealth, financial markets, economic growth, the number of jobs we can support by classification, how complex they are, everything depends on us having adequate surplus energy to run our economy as it's configured. If we don't get that, the economy will revert to a much simpler state, which is a way of saying it may it be something that we would experience either as a crisis or even a collapse in terms of what's possible compared to today. So will this be sufficient? Will it be sufficient putting up wind towers and solar panels? The short answer to that is no, it will not be sufficient. Simply because of the nature of these types of energy. They are diffuse. They give us electricity. They don't give us liquid fuels. Liquid fuels are how we run our container ships, how we operate jets, how we operate our entire just-in-time global economy. It doesn't run on electricity. It runs currently on fossil fuels, specifically on high net energy liquid fuels. So here's the challenge we face. This is a model. I like this model. It shows here on the bottom the amount of net of energy we're likely to get out of fossil fuels. It doesn't show it running out all at once. Instead, what it shows here is about a 10-year flattish spot where we're just not getting more. We're just getting slightly less and less. That's where we happen to be. And so this height right here of this bar, we'll call that 100% of our output from fossil fuels. Now remember, 100% of our output from fossil fuels is a big, big chunk of the total amount of energy that we currently use. It's about 80% of our total energy. And so we're going to have to take that 100% output of fossil fuels, and if we want our economy in the top line to continue growing, as is, it's been growing for a long time, we will have to replace 100% of fossil fuel output in the next 25 years. And then again, we'd have to do it one more time in the next 20 years. This has never been done before. It represents the most colossal challenge that our species has ever faced. And it seems improbable because this sort of an energy transition to replace 100% of fossil fuel output in just 25 years by other means is an impossible task. It might have been possible if we started 40 years ago, but today it's an impossible task. So it won't happen. And by the way, at current rates, if we let market forces determine this for us, it's going to take about 400 years to transform our energy system. This chart says if we want our economy, by which I mean our financial system, to not collapse, we have to do it within 25 years. It's not happening at current paces. So either it won't happen or an immense amount of investment is going to have to be dedicated towards solving this particular problem. By the way, my conclusion to that is that our entire model of economic growth is coming to an end. And not because we want it to, or not because of anything other than we failed to properly plan for this moment. We should have been planning for this back in the 1970s or 60s. We didn't do that. So here we are, and the question is what happens next? And on top of that, of course, the most important E of them all is the environment. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about it briefly. Let me just go there quickly. When I was a boy, and I was like 7 or 8 years old, I remember when we would take long drives, we would get insects all over the windshield of our car, and it was my job to wipe them off, when we would stop for petrol. This is how it is today when we take the same drive. There's barely any insects out there. I know people in Germany are much more aware of this than people in the United States. It's a very, very big problem. It's a predicament. It's really rather frightening and worrisome to me. This is the rusty patch bumblebee. It's endangered. It's probably on its way to being extinct. This is just a wild bee. We now know that there's this huge insect Armageddon going on where we're losing insects like crazy. I think Europe's ahead of the United States by figuring out that these nasty, nasty things, the neonicotinoid pesticides here, are probably the biggest cause of that. They're just awful. And in the United States, we are not even close to banning them or regulating them in any meaningful way. We see things like this, that trees that have been alive all over the world for 2,000 years. This is an African baobab, but the kauri trees in New Zealand, trees all over the world that have survived for millennia are suddenly dying, speaking to stresses. We know that there's a massive drop in sperm count in males across Western countries that's pretty profound, and it's actually a worldwide drop now as they've looked at it. We're seeing lots and lots of losses of tree cover. We're seeing our oceans are starting to get acidified. We know that it's too hot even for turtles to generate males. They're turning female because the sands are too warm in their nesting centers. And of course, the oceans are full of plastic. I could go on and on about this, but we know that growth itself, the way we've grown, has led to us where we might say if we had a dashboard for our ecological world, it is flashing red on every single warning sign that we have right now. And so we know that from a world standpoint, from an ecological standpoint, it's vital that we understand our impacts and we have to stop growth for its own sake. We know that. But it's going to happen anyway because we can't grow anymore because of the energy systems that we have. And so this is why my summary of all of this is we have an economy that really must grow or it faces collapse. It's not the economy. The economy doesn't have to grow. But our financial system does because of our debt-based money system. If you want to understand that better, go to the crash course. I spend 11 chapters just talking about money, how it's created, central banking, debt-based money systems. There's just the money system we have is really addicted to growth. It's either growing or collapsing. The problem is our energy system can't grow. Maybe it can grow a little bit, but not for much longer. This is time for serious adults to get our arms around this and understand the implications. And by the way, the environment is flashing really, really strong warning signs that this whole model is broken anyway. So we have to come up with a new model for who we are and how we inhabit this planet. As a reminder, without a healthy earth, there's no wealth. Wealth is irrelevant. There's no health for humans. This is really critically important. It's vital that we understand this and understand this better. My conclusion is that economic growth, it's impossible, it's unsustainable, and by the way, it's also over. Financial markets, these are going to be the places where wealth is destroyed because financial markets are a representation, they're a fantasy representation of true wealth. What is true wealth? True wealth is your health. True wealth is having abundant natural resources. True wealth is having rich soils that aren't polluted and fresh water that isn't polluted, and having a healthy ecosystem out there to support us. That's true wealth. We're destroying those things, all of them, in pursuit of our growth, in pursuit of profits. And so that's the nature of the situation we have. So what are the solutions? Well, this is a picture of a place that I own with Evie, my fiance, and we've started to go back to the original hard assets, which is land. We've started to build soil, and we're working on our community of people to help share that with us. Hard assets, of course, are the way that you begin to protect wealth and preserve it, because this is true wealth. Hard assets are true wealth. This is an important way to begin to preserve what financial wealth you have. We talk about this in a book called Prosper, which you can find easily, and this talks about 8 different forms of capital. Financial capital, very important. But we also talk about social capital. We also talk about living capital, which this is an example of living capital, but also your own health in your own body is living capital, and so on. We talk about a lot of these different forms of capital, but the one I want to leave you with today, one of the most important ones that you could talk about, is what we call knowledge capital. What do you know? If you don't have the right story in your mind, you're going to have a very difficult time understanding what's coming. So understanding the energy story is a form of knowledge capital that's critical, but increasingly, what skills do you have? So just this past weekend at our farm, this is my fiance Evie. She's up to her wrists in a pig that we slaughtered, and we had a bunch of people over, and we talked about how to go from farm to table, or in this case, from field to barbecue grill. So this is what we did on our property. We talk about all of this at peakprosperity.com there. You can see, if you come to the website, links there to get you to the crash course, the books, things like that. But most importantly, I need you to understand the rehearsal is over. The energy crisis is here. It's here now. You're already experiencing it. No, it's not going to go away. It might get better for a little time, but this is going to shape your future, all of our futures, literally for the rest of our lives. And so understanding that and understanding how to protect yourself, how to protect your wealth, that's what you're going to be learning at this conference. Hopefully you got a little piece of that from this. If you take anything from this presentation I gave you, it's simply this: we're out of time. It's time for you to begin really preparing as if everything I just told you is true, because it is. And if the data changes, hey, I'll change my mind too, but this is how the data stacks up right now. It's really important for you to take it seriously. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening. It's been a real pleasure being with you here today. And please come by Peak Prosperity if you want to contact me or learn more about this. Bye-bye.